Hey everybody, it's low carb and keto nutrition specialist Amy Berger from 2itnutrition.com bringing you another video in doing keto without the crazy. Before I get into today's topic, just a couple little business items to tell you about. If you have been following a low carb or ketogenic diet and your fat loss is stalled, do check out my book, The Stall Slayer. It is about exactly that, breaking fat loss stalls or plateaus on a low carb or keto diet. There'll be a link to that below in the notes, or you can just visit stallslayer.com. It's also available on Amazon. Speaking of Amazon, I'm just going to plant a little seed right now. I will be talking about this next thing in much greater detail very soon, but I have another book due out later this year, due out in December, although that's subject to change. The book is called End Your Carb Confusion. And I'm not the only author. Do you want to know who I teamed up with to write this book? Dr. Eric Westman. Hello, I've only been reading Dr. Westman's papers for like 20 years. I've only had this man on a pedestal for like 2 decades and oh my God, the research. Anyway, he deigned to write a book with little old me. And so End Your Carb Confusion, it is available for pre-order right now on Amazon. Again, I'll have a handy link for you below in the notes. It is the book I would want if I was brand new to low carb and keto, because Dr. Westman and I are very much on the same page with regard to being absolutely stunned at how complicated and confusing this way of eating has been made out to be, when the truth is it could not be more simple or straightforward. Don't eat carbs, or just eat very, very little sugar and starch. There, guess what? You're doing keto. So if you are completely overwhelmed by all of the conflicting and different and confusing, complicated, high-level scientific gobbledygook stuff out there, End Your Carb Confusion is the book for you. I wish it was already out, but it's not, so just pre-order. Okay, and that's all I'm going to say, because I will be doing more videos about that in the future. All right, today's topic: why is my blood sugar higher on keto? Now, I have no notes, so hopefully this won't be too disjointed. And of course, disclaimer, I'm not a physician. This is not medical advice for anyone. This is just my knowledge of what I have learned. So, clearly, low carb and ketogenic diets are dynamite for improving, if not all out, reversing type 2 diabetes and prediabetes, right? And even in type 1 diabetes, they can dramatically reduce your insulin requirements, right? People with type 1 will always need some insulin, but you can use much, much less. And by using much, much less, you are less likely to have very crazy ups and downs like most people with type 1 diabetes on a standard Western diet do. I always like to mention type 1 quickly, because like 95% of people with diabetes have type 2, but so sometimes people just say diabetes, and I know that people with type 1 feel really left out and discriminated against, so I always try to acknowledge that there is another situation, but it just so happens that low carb and keto is also helpful for that too. I will link to a video that I did about keto for type 1. Okay, so if low carb and keto eating is so good for lowering high blood sugar, how come some people still sometimes see high blood sugar on keto? Well, we have to kind of lay some general groundwork, and then I'll talk about specific situations. I guess the first thing to do is define high. What is high blood sugar? Is anything over 70, anything over 90, anything over 120? High blood sugar is a relative term, and I don't have an answer to that. I can't tell you what's high. Obviously 200, 300, that's high. 110, 120 doesn't worry me at all, depending on the context, and that's something we'll talk about. So if you're wondering, well, what's she talking about? What's high? I can't give you a specific number. Just higher than you're comfortable with being, let's just say, whether you wear a CGM or you have just a glucometer that you take a measurement every now and then. So I guess the most important thing to appreciate with regard to changes in blood sugar on a ketogenic diet is that you cannot confuse what's happening at one point in time with the general overall situation. And here's kind of an analogy to get you thinking about this. When I was little, my family took a vacation to Florida, and we're from New York. So we went in the winter to get away from the winter and to go to Disney World and SeaWorld and all that. And this was before Universal, before MGM. That's how old this is, like 1985, 80, what, like early 80s. So anyway, we go to Florida in winter, and guess what happened in Florida when we were there? It snowed. It snowed in Tampa, Florida. Now, that's probably not unheard of, but it's pretty rare. They had a freak snowstorm. They had to close SeaWorld because it was like frozen. We couldn't go to SeaWorld. We had to buy winter coats down there because who brings a winter coat to go to Florida? Anyway, my point is, if we had judged or interpreted the climate of Florida based on the weather on that one day or during that couple of day period, we would have a total misconception about Florida. We would say, oh my God, Florida's so cold, it snowed, the water freezes, when for the very most part, Florida's warm, right? So don't confuse the overall trend, the overall general situation with what happens at one moment. So how does that relate to the blood sugar? It's like if you do have a glucometer and you check, oh my God, it's 120, but you're normally usually in the 90s and the 80s and the 70s. Okay, there is no reason to fear this. Glucose gets a really bad rap in the ketogenic world, but the fact is, the human body requires glucose. Your cells do need glucose for a couple of specific things that cannot be done by fatty acids or ketones or amino acids from protein. It has to be glucose. So glucose is not the enemy. Very high glucose very often is the enemy, just like insulin. Insulin is a life-giving, absolutely essential hormone. What we don't want is high levels of insulin all the time. We want it pulsatile, where it just kind of blips up every now and then. So glucose is not the enemy. Constantly very high glucose is what we want to avoid. And so, but most of us know, if you're new to this, maybe you're just hearing this for the first time, the body's need for glucose doesn't mean that you have to eat carbohydrate, because your body can make glucose out of other things. That's why anyone can live on a zero carb diet or carnivore diet, or even that's why you can fast, like, because your body will make the glucose it needs. Okay, but that aside, because the body needs glucose, and certain types of activity are fueled more by glucose than they are by fats and ketones. And remember, the human body is not a machine. It's not a robot. It's a biological system with all these interlocking, overlapping pathways and mechanisms. And so some of these things, so I guess what I'm saying is you're never burning only fat or burning only ketones or burning only glucose. Even somebody with morbid obesity and type 2 diabetes will be using fat to some extent. It might just be really small, but the body's always using a combination of different fuels depending on the activity you're doing, whether you're sitting on your couch recording a video or you're out doing an Ironman triathlon. The proportion of these things that are fueling you are different. Some of them are fueled with more fat and less glucose. Some are fueled with more glucose and less fat. So why does any of this matter? Okay. People absolutely freak out when they see a blood sugar that's a lot higher than they're used to seeing. And this is why, if you've watched my previous videos or read my blog maybe, I'm really not a fan of people measuring their blood sugar, because many people out there just don't know how to interpret the number. I'm not opposed to testing. I'm opposed to testing when you don't understand all of these mechanisms, so you can understand why your blood sugar is doing what it's doing in the context in which you measured. So I'll have to give some specific examples to kind of walk you through this, but like, here's three different things that can raise blood sugar even on a low carb or ketogenic diet. The first is stress. So there's a doctor named Colin Champ who I admire very much. He's a radiation oncologist, but he's an MD. He's very keto friendly. And he posted something a while back. This was a couple of years ago, but I never forgot it because it was so instructive. He checked his blood sugar before he left home. Checked it. It was, I forget what it was, 80 something, 90 something. He commutes to work. He got stuck in a very, very aggravating traffic situation, like very stressful, very angering. And there's nowhere to go. There's nowhere to burn that glucose off. You're just sitting in the car. He gets to work, and just out of curiosity, knowing he had just experienced this really stressful situation, he checks his blood sugar. If I recall correctly, it was about 130. So it had jumped, what, like 40 points, if not more, just from being in that very stressful, angering situation. Because evolutionarily speaking, this is the fight or flight mechanism. This is cortisol and adrenaline raising your blood sugar, because very intense physical activity is fueled with a greater proportion of glucose compared to fat. Glucose is for that really quick burst of energy. So if you're in a life or death situation, fight or flight, you either have to fight for your life or flee for your life, fight or flight, you better have access to a bunch of glucose. There better be a lot of glucose in your bloodstream so it can fuel those muscles. So you want that to happen. What the problem is when it happens when you're not fighting for your life, when you're sitting in your car in an aggravating traffic jam, or I can remember this from my cubicle days, when you're sitting in your cubicle and something really irritating has happened at work and you're just sitting there stewing and festering in anger. So your blood sugar is going to be high, but you're not running for your life or fighting for your life. So the sugar's just there. And eventually it'll go down. Eventually your cells will take it in. But anyway, that's a normal physiological process. If you're very stressed out, your blood sugar is probably going to be higher. This is why, in general, like that's the acute sense, your blood sugar will jump in a stressful acute situation. But if you are a stressy McStresserson chronic stress ball, then your blood sugar might be doing that all the time. It's not going to be like 300, but it'll be higher than it would otherwise be if you were a little more calm as a general way of life. Now, because I just mentioned the intense activity, that's another thing that can raise blood sugar. I will link to a podcast down below in which Dr. Robert Cywes, who has an awesome YouTube channel himself, maybe I'll link to that too. Well, he did a podcast where he talked about this very thing. He normally eats very, very low carb, and his blood sugar, I think he said it's typically in the 60s or 70s most of the time. When he does intense exercise, his blood sugar can double. It can become 120, 130. Why? Because his body needs the glucose. His muscles need that glucose. He's working really hard, really intensely. And again, no matter how ketogenic you are, no matter how low carb you are, that particular type of energy requires glucose. Again, it doesn't require dietary carbohydrate, but it requires glucose. This is why your liver will put a lot more of it out into your bloodstream so the muscles can suck it up. Thank you very much, body, for working exactly the way you're supposed to work. And yes, you store glucose in your muscles as glycogen, so they're feeding off of that too, but that will not reflect in your blood sugar. The glycogen, the stored glucose in your muscles, the muscles don't have the enzyme to release that into the bloodstream. It stays in the muscle to fuel the muscle it's in. That's a little too much detail for right now. So the stress, the exercise, and I can't tell you how many people I've had email me, I was 48 hours fasted, and then I did a super sprint high intensity workout, and my blood sugar skyrocketed to 120. What's wrong with me? Okay, first of all, 120 is not a skyrocket. Number two, again, congratulations. Your body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do to give you the energy to get through that workout, especially if you're in a fasted state. So this is why I don't like for people to test, whether it's blood sugar or ketones, because too many people don't have the appreciation for why this happens and what it means. The third is something many of you are probably familiar with, but some of you may not be. It's called the dawn phenomenon. Dawn, like first thing in the morning, DAWN. I will link to a blog post or two that I think explain dawn phenomenon really well. One of them is by Dr. Jason Fung. Another one is by this lady, Jennu Ruhl, who is not a doctor, but I think she has type 2 diabetes, manages it awesomely with low carb, and she wrote a really instructional post about dawn phenomenon. So the dawn phenomenon is where You could have a higher fasting blood sugar. And again, higher is relative. Could be 100, could be 110, 120. Again, these numbers for fasting don't really worry me at all. And the reason this happens is because in just about everybody, not just diabetics, but everybody, early in the morning, your cortisol, your adrenaline do this little bump. And guess what? That's what wakes you up. That's what wakes you up. No, oh, I'm awake. Time to start the day. Your body gets this little jolt. And part of that jolt involves releasing sugar from your liver into the blood. Now, everybody, well, I shouldn't say everybody, there's always exceptions. This is a thing that happens to most people, regardless of your metabolic health. Again, that's what wakes you up. In a healthy person with no blood sugar control issues, it comes right back down pretty quickly because it doesn't go all that high and then it just comes right back down. So let's say you don't have any form of diabetes. You wake up, you piddle around a couple minutes, do your bathroom routine, brush your teeth, you check your blood sugar. By the time you check it, it's totally back to normal. It's in the 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. If you have type 2 diabetes and you have the dawn phenomenon just like everyone else, your blood sugar is probably going to go higher and it might stay somewhat elevated for a little bit longer than in somebody who doesn't have glucose problems. So you might see your blood sugar 110, 130, 140 even, maybe even higher. That's just a reflection of your situation. This is, again, that's looking at one snapshot versus where is your blood sugar throughout the rest of the day. If you happen to have used a CGM, maybe you saw your blood sugar first thing in the morning, 120, 130, but the whole rest of the day, even after you eat meals, you're between, 65 and 100. Then who cares what that fasting level was? Because for like 98% of the day, your blood sugar is really good. And this is partly why most of us place more emphasis on the hemoglobin A1C rather than the fasting glucose, because the fasting sugar can be elevated for any number of reasons. The dawn phenomenon was one. That stressful situation was one. Let's say you are going to the lab to have blood drawn, and on the way to the lab, you get into a fender bender or you get stuck in bad traffic. You arrive to the lab and your blood sugar is higher. So this is, the A1C is more of a longer term measurement. So I think the A1C is far more important than any one blood sugar reading in time, whether it's the fasting reading or any other one-time snapshot of you just checking your sugar. But the A1C has shortcomings of its own. I wrote a blog post about this for a company that I used to work for. I'll post a link to it below. And so even the A1C is not 100% reliable. But I know a lot of the low-carb doctors that we know and love, that we follow, don't place a whole lot of emphasis on the fasting blood sugar because it can be so misleading. It's just like, it snows in Florida, it must be really cold in Florida. No, it snowed on that one day. What, your fasting blood sugar is 130, you must have diabetes. Well, no, my blood sugar is 92 the whole rest of the day. So you see the issue here. What else do I want to say? I want to come back to dawn phenomenon for a minute with something, but oh right, the A1C and the fasting glucose. Like I said, even the A1C has shortcomings of its own that you can't base a lot of decisions solely based on that. Now, if your A1C is 10.5, okay, unless that's a lab error, you have a problem with blood sugar. If your fasting blood sugar is 320, you have a problem, like unless it's a lab error. But when it's in that gray zone, again, your A1C could be 5.5, 5.6, your fasting sugar 120, 130. I would look, again, not a physician, but if I were, or just as an educated healthcare person, I would look at the total picture. Okay, there's the fasting sugar, there's the A1C. What's your insulin level? And again, that's just a fasting level, but that's one more piece of the puzzle. How about your triglycerides? How about your HDL? How about your C-reactive protein? How about your homocysteine? How about any other markers that can be looked at as a total picture? I never like to, I mean, I help people sort of understand their blood work. I don't diagnose anything, but we want to look at the full picture, right? When you have a mosaic, the mosaic has individual tiles that if you only looked at one tile, wow, it's a blue tile. But then you look at the whole mosaic, it's blue, it's red, it's green, it's purple, it's white, it's this different shape. You cannot really freak out over any one number in isolation. So that's a big thing. Now, getting back to the dawn phenomenon before I forget, there are a couple of things you can do if you have the dawn phenomenon. I'm not concerned. I mean, this is a thing that happened. It's normal human physiology. If it would make you feel better mentally and emotionally to see a lower number in the morning, you could take a little bit of vinegar in the evening. I mean, I've gotten to the point where I can just like do a shot of apple cider vinegar or a big spoonful and it doesn't even really burn anymore. But you could take vinegar diluted in water, or if you're having a small nighttime snack, add something vinegary to it. Vinegar is oddly very good for blood sugar and insulin. And wow, there's going to be a lot of links in the notes here. I wrote a very detailed blog post about why. What does vinegar do that makes it good for blood sugar? And Dr. Fung has a good post on it too. I'll link to that as well. So you can have that at night and your blood sugar might be a little lower the next morning. Some people, I don't know so much about this, but I've heard doctors say that if you are someone that wakes up with really high blood sugar, do like 20 jumping jacks and then test 10 minutes later. Give that glucose somewhere to go. And I know I was just saying, well, intense exercise raises the blood sugar. 20 jumping jacks is not intense exercise. It might be for some people if you're very sedentary, jumping jacks are intense. But my point is, okay, your blood sugar is already high. It's not going to go higher when you start activity. What's going to happen is those working muscles are going to take that glucose out of the blood. So don't test it first thing. Or if you want, test it. Oh, it's 140. Do some jumping jacks, do some push-ups, get some, like 3 minutes worth of exercise. And then wait a couple of minutes and test again and see what's happened. It'll probably be a little bit lower. So let's see. There's probably more examples as to why blood sugar can be high. I mean, certain medications keep blood sugar higher than they, normally would be. The corticosteroids, the prednisone, the cortisone, including shots, including, I don't know if they're delivered in pill, I think they are in pill form, and including the nasal sprays. I learned that from my co-author, Dr. Westman. Every spring when it's allergy season again, and people get put on the steroid nasal sprays, he finds a couple of patients who have to take those nasal sprays for allergies. Their weight loss kind of stops or their blood sugar gets a little wonky. So we just have to appreciate the richness and the complexity of the human body. There's always an explanation for what's going on. Well, I did a fasted workout. Why is my blood sugar so high? Because it's supposed to be high when you do a fasted workout. Yeah, type 2 diabetes, where your blood sugar is elevated basically all the time, no matter what you do, is very different from these one-off times where your blood sugar is higher because your body has a need for glucose in that situation, a fasted workout, a stressful situation, dawn phenomenon, which is not a need for glucose, it's just a normal physiological thing that happens. So I'll just emphasize again, don't confuse and don't become alarmed by the one little snapshot of blood sugar versus what your body's doing the whole rest of the day, the whole rest of the week, the whole rest of the month. So let me think if there's anything major I'm forgetting before I end. There's always something I forget. Let's see if it's anything major. No, I don't think so. I've always said, and I stand by this, you should have to sit through a 3-hour biochemistry lecture before you are allowed to purchase a glucometer or a CGM or a ketone meter. You should have to have a basic understanding of this stuff before you're even allowed to buy the thing, because otherwise People freak out, they get really scared when their body is actually operating perfectly normally. I guess that's it for now. Stallslayer.com or find the Stall Slayer on Amazon. End Your Carb Confusion, available now for pre-order on Amazon. Please do pre-order. The more people that pre-order, the higher the numbers will be for the first week's sales and the higher our likelihood of hitting a bestseller list. And if you know how many millions of people out there could benefit from this way of eating, but who need it explained simply and succinctly, then we really want to get on those lists because word will get out. So that's it. And thanks for watching. 2atnutrition.com is my website. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.